Innistrad Crimson Vow is dropping very shortly. Just a week from now, we'll have it on Arena for pre-release. So I wanted to get together and talk through some limited stuff. Let's start with the mechanics. The first one up, I think, is really, really cool. I like blood a lot. It creates little tokens that you can sacrifice. Here, there's lots of creatures in red and black that do this. There's a couple things in blue that make it, but this is mainly a black and red mechanic. There's some artifacts that do that as well, but these create tokens that say 1 tap, discard a card, sacrifice the blood token to draw a card, and then there's tons of stuff in black and red that utilizes those tokens for different effects. So it reminds me a lot of the food mechanic in Eldraine. If you remember way back when, it's also similar to stuff they've done with clues and whatever. But I think this one's really, really good. I think it's balanced a little bit better. So with clues, you usually wanted to sacrifice them. I think with these blood tokens, you're going to want to use them for your creatures to get their different effects. The next one up is one of the worst mechanics I've seen. Very confusing the way it's written, but it is Cleave. So you can see here on Path of Peril, if you pay the Cleave cost, you ignore the words in the square brackets. If you pay the normal 3 mana cost for Path of Peril, the spell destroys all creatures with mana value 2 or less. For the Cleave cost of 6 mana, you destroy all creatures. So that's going to trip me up. I know it's going to trip a lot of people up, but we'll have to get used to it with Cleave. Lastly, for the new stuff, we have Training, and this is like the opposite of Mentor. So any creature with Training, this is primarily going to be in white and green. Any creature with Training, whenever it attacks with another creature with greater power, put a +1/+1 counter on the Training creature. So if you attack here with Savior of Allenbeck, there's a 3/3 attacking with it. The Savior becomes a 2/3. And then it can keep growing after that. Up next, some returning mechanics. We're going to get transform, whether it's daybound, nightbound, or if there's other different conditions to transform stuff. But this is one of the most broken cards in the set. You're going to hate seeing this across the battlefield, but you're going to love when you draft it. And so you can see here that for 6 mana, you basically just win the game. And then when it flips, you win it even harder. Another returning mechanic is Disturb, and so this was another one of my favorite mechanics from Midnight Hunt, so I'm glad this one's coming back. It's a little bit different. Instead of disturbing into a creature, you disturb into an enchantment. So that opens up a lot of new possibilities. There's different enchantment synergy decks in white and blue. And then there's really not disturb creatures in black or in black this time. It's mainly just white blue. And last up, returning. This is from prior. I forget where this set, where this mechanic originated in which set, but Exploit. So when a creature enters the battlefield that has the exploit ability, you may sacrifice another creature, and then you get an effect here. So you can see if you pay 4 mana, you can exploit, sacrifice a different creature. After you pay 4 mana, when this ETBs, then you can counter a spell or whatever. All right, so in the draft, things that this is pretty universal these days, but you have to get on board. You need 2 drops, you need 3 drops. 1 drops are very good these days, but you can't draft a slow, dirtily deck. You need to get on board, and you need to threaten your opponent. It's not just casting 1 force and stuff, because then your opponent can ignore that. They can save their removal. You want to be able to drop threats. The next thing is value. You need value. Lots of creatures are able to provide value in modern Magic. You don't really have to rely on a spell that's just pure card draw these days. So you can just get value from a lot of creatures or from something like Investigator's Journal here when you can generate repeated value for your cards. Last up, of course, we need interaction. You can see one of the better sweepers I've seen in a while, but you're going to need to be able to interact with your opponent's threats. In threats, it's not always that you need unconditional removal because of the amount of creatures with persistent abilities. Sometimes they're 2/2s that have an ability that really trips you up. So you need a way to interact with creatures big, small, and you need a way to deal with them permanently. Pacify effects don't deal with a creature that has a persistent ability, right? So you're going to need interaction. All right, up next, let's get into the colors. So with white, It has it's very aggressive in this set, and you're going to want to stay ahead. So aggressive decks, they lose when they run out of cards. And so Resistance Squad here, if you have another human, there's a lot of humans and spirits in white. In white-green, it's kind of the human tribal deck. But Resistance Squad's a 3/2 for 3, so it's already stats are fine, and if you control a human, you draw a card. That allows you to pressure your opponent, stay on the aggressive, and then stay ahead on parity as far as cards go with your aggro deck. And white in this set is pretty aggressive. Next up, value. So as we said before, one of the keys in the draft, you gotta have value. So Angelic Quartermaster, 5 mana for a 3/3 flyer, which is already fine on rate, and then it's going to give the Gavany Silversmith. You remember that card from Midnight Hunt. 2+1/+1 counters on each of up to 2 other target creatures. So there's a theme in green and white. We're putting +1/+1 counters on things. There's a little miniature theme there where you can get some bonuses, benefits from that. So that's going to fill in into that mechanic as well. So this one's a really nice one. And it increases your board, enables attacks, so puts pressure on your opponent. So just a very high pick here. 5-drop. That only is a 3/3. Even if it's flying, tends not to be that great and limited, but with this ability, it's really good. And it fits in with what white's trying to do. Next is you're going to have to watch out for this. It's a miniature little overrun here. It's a lot of stats for 3 mana. So one creature gets +3/+3, another one gets +2/+2, and then the last one gets +1/+1, and they all get vigilance as well, so you can't attack back. So this is going to win a lot of races. It's going to put your opponent ahead. It's also going to enable a lot of those training triggers as well. And then it's going to be that final push. It's going to force you to make some bad trades if you're up against an aggressive deck, because you're not going to have a choice. This is 6 points of damage that's coming through for 3 mana. So one to watch out for is Arm the Cathars. Top comments. So first up, I have Kindly Ancestor. I think this card's super strong. A 2/3 lifelink for 3 is already relevant. It has Disturb on the back side, so this is going to get in for a couple points of damage. It's going to block okay. Your opponent's going to have to deal with it because you can't race a lifelinker, and then when they do deal with it, you just get that Disturb enchantment, where you can enchant an evasive creature or another aggressive creature with lifelink to help you win a race. So I think this card is quite strong. Be happy to first pick this one. Up next, Drogskull Infantry. 2 mana for a 2/2, which is fine on rate. You're going to want those in your deck. And when it trades off, you can disturb it for 3 and a white. And on the back side, you buff up a creature +2/+2. So this is going to give you that reach. Buff up one of your smaller aggressive creatures to be able to tangle with their late game big butt creature. It's going to put your creatures out of removal. It's going to make your evasive flyers into huge threats. So it's going to be able to get you those last points of damage through with any aggressive deck as well. Like that card quite a bit. And last up, Griff Rider, just an efficient flyer here with training. It's a 2/1, which isn't great on rate, but it is flying. It's 3 mana, and when you attack, it's going to become a 3/2. And a 3/2 flyer for 3 is a very good rate. And if you can put 2 +1/+1 counters on this, it becomes pretty badass. So that's white for you. Up next, we have blue. So first things first, I have an uncommon to watch out for, Inevitability. I don't know how good this card is yet. It's 6 mana for a 4/4 flyer, which is a good late game threat. The middle ability I don't really care about. There is a green-blue self-mill deck, but when you're attacking with your 4/4 flyer, the game's going to be over pretty quick, so I'm not sure how relevant that's going to be. The very relevant ability is 3 mana, put Screaming Swarm from your graveyard into your library, second from the top. So if you do mill yourself and mill this card, you can get it back. If your opponent kills it, you can get it back, and then it just becomes inevitable that this thing's going to fly over and kill him. So if you can stall out the ground, if you can gain a bunch of life, there's a life gain theme in white, so if you're white-blue, can do that. You can eventually just kill them with this thing. So we'll see how fast the format is, but I think this is one to watch out for. Up next, card draw. Thirst for Discovery, just a super efficient card draw spell. 3 mana for an instant speed, draw 3 cards. Can't beat that. You discard 2 unless you discard a basic land card, but the odds of you having a basic land or drawing a basic land in one of those 3 cards is pretty damn high. And if you're in that self-mill deck or a recursive deck, there's also a very minor discarding theme in this set. So if you have any cards that benefit from that, discarding isn't so bad for you. So there's lots of ways that this can actually turn into a benefit. Also, if you discard disturb creatures, then that works as well. Last up, I have a build around. So Storm Chaser Drake, I think this is best in blue-white because those disturb creatures come back as enchantments, but it's a 2/1 flyer for 2, which is already just a good card. It's already just a fine rate. But whenever it becomes the target of a spell, you draw a card. So if your Kindly Ancestor enchants this and it becomes a 2/1 flying lifelinker, you also draw a card. So this thing can get out of hand pretty quick, tons of card advantage, and I think this card's going to be one to watch out for, a must kill if your opponent plays it. Up next, I have our top commons for blue. First up, we'll have to see how this one goes. Stitched Assistant. This is the exploit mechanic that we were talking about. Generally, with exploit creatures, you want those to be at the top of your curve when you already have irrelevant creatures on the battlefield that you don't really need anymore. Usually, early game, your creatures are a bit too precious, but there's a ton of very good sacrifice fodder in this set, in black and in blue, that we'll get into when we talk about the archetypes. So I think this card is going to be good enough that it's going to be easy to get that sack fodder, even if you're not in blue-black. If you're blue-white, you can sack your disturb creature, and then you can cast the enchantment part of it. Also, you're scrying 1, then drawing a card, which is much more valuable, so you can scry away the land or whatever you need. So I do like Stitched Assistant quite a bit. I think it's going to be a high pick. It's a 3-mana 3/2 at worst, so the floor is very low on that. Up next, I have Lantern Bearer. So this was pretty tough to choose between these two, but Lantern Bearer is a 1/1 flyer for 1. If you have it early, it's going to peck in for a few damage, but the value in this card is the Disturb. So 2 in a blue on the Disturb side gives you an enchantment that gets a creature +1/+1 in flying, which is really strong. That's a strong enchantment. And to get it for free, essentially, is pretty big game. So this is going to be super valuable in Self-Mill, obviously in the Disturb deck, and in the Exploit deck. It's going to fit very well in all of those. Even in the blue-red non-creature spell deck, it's going to interact well with your enchantments, with enchantments as well. So, awesome card. Up next is Scattered Thoughts. This is the card draw spell. Usually I don't like raw card draw in Modern Magic these days, and Modern Limited, because creatures draw you cards, and there's tons of ways to get value, tons of things to do with your mana, but 4 mana, instant speed, draw the best 2 cards in the top 4 and the rest in your graveyard. Now, if you have Disturb stuff, if you have Graveyard Recursion, it's just pure value. I mean, best case scenario, this can just be a draw 4 mana draw 4, right? If you dump a couple Disturb cards into your yard. So I think that one's going to be pretty valuable. You're not going to want to load up on those, maybe 1, maximum 2 in any deck, but I do think that one's pretty good, especially also in the Self-Mill deck. It's also very strong. All right, up next we have black. There's a recursion theme here, and I think there are some pretty good recursion cards. So Undead Butler, 2 mana for a 1/2, great sacrifice fodder. When it ETBs, you mill 3 cards. So if you're blue-black and you have some Disturb stuff, you can get value there. If you're black-green and you have some pieces of the green-blue self-mill in your green pile, you can get value there. And then when it dies, so if you sacrifice it to an exploit creature and you have a creature that you milled on accident, you can get it back from your yard to your hand, or you just get any creature from your yard to your hand. So I think this card is very good sacrifice fodder. It has synergies across multiple deck types, and then there's a good recursion theme in black as well. Next up, zombie value. So there's tons of zombies again in black. So Archghoul of Thraven here is a 3 mana 3/2. There's a ton of 3 mana 3/2s in this set. I don't know why, but they're everywhere. But whenever this or another zombie dies, so again, we're looking at those exploit synergies here, right? So whenever this or another zombie you control dies, look at the top card of your library. If it's a zombie card, you can reveal it, put it into your hand. If you don't, you may put it into your yard. So if it reveals a land and you're flooded, you can get that in the yard. If it's a zombie, it's pure value. You get to draw it. If it's a disturbed creature, you can put that in your yard and get the value from the enchantment side of that as well. So lots of cross synergies with this one. I think it's going to go very well in every black deck except maybe black-red. Black-green, it's probably not the best in, but black-blue, black-white, it's an all-star. So last up, it wouldn't be a limited set if we didn't have premium black removal at uncommon, and that's going to be Hero's Downfall. 3 mana, instant speed, murder with upside, right? If your opponent does manage to open up or play a planeswalker against you, it's going to kill that as well. So, very strong card. First pickable for sure. Next up, we have commons. First one, now normally, I don't like the 4 mana kill spells, but I wasn't as, a lot of the commons in black are very synergistic. This set in general is very synergistic. And so I'm looking for, when I'm looking at top commons, things that I wouldn't mind first picking is going to be those generically good cards that are going to fit in every deck. So I chose Bleed Dry, 4 mana, instant speed, delete a creature, even indestructible ones, because it gives -13/-13 till end of turn, and then it gets exiled as well, which is relevant in this set, especially when you have a lot of recursion and then those disturbed creatures. So I think this one is still going to find its way in multiple copies into most decks. I wouldn't play more than 2, just because 4 mana is quite a bit to pay. But it just deletes anything, which is great. So I have that as our best first pickable raw power common in black. Up next, Courier Bat. I love this card. 3 mana for a Windrake, a 2/2 flyer, which is already on rate. It's fine. When it ETBs, if you gained life this turn, it gets to recur a creature card from your graveyard to your hand. So in black-white, that's the life gain deck, but because black is half of that, usually you're going to have some ways to gain life in black, and if you have this card, you can draft around it. Make sure you have some extra ways to gain life. In green, there's ways to gain life as well, so this card can do some serious work and becomes a very, very cheap, efficient, good Gravedigger effect, so I like this card quite a bit. And then lastly, I have Desperate Farmer. We're talking about lifelinkers. This is a very strong one if you can flip it. And so it's usually a pretty easy thing to do to kill another creature, whether it's exploit or combat or what have you. And when you do, you transform it. It's a 2/2 lifelinker for 3, which isn't great, but it's fine. It blocks well, gains you some life. If your opponent doesn't have anything, you can, swing a race or whatever. But when it transforms, it becomes a 4/3 lifelinker. And that's very strong. That is a must-kill threat. If you're black-blue and you exploit your Lantern Bearer, and all of a sudden this is a 5/4 lifelink flyer, it's going to end the game pretty quick. It's going to win you any race. So I think this card is quite strong. All right, up next we have red, uncommon. So red has a pinger. There are lots of 1 toughness things in this set that it's going to take down. It's also going to help you win combats or make combats awkward, and it comes for 4/3 body for 4 mana, which is fine. It's not great, but it's acceptable, and that's on the daybound side. So on the nightbound side, you can use this effect multiple times in a turn, and it stops blockers, and it becomes a 5/5. So if you have 6 mana, you can stop 2 of your opponent's things from blocking. You can deal 2 damage to one of your opponent's creatures. So it becomes very, very busted. Up next, we have Vampiroclasm, as I like to call it. So Vampire's Vengeance, 3 mana for an instant speed. Deal 2 damage to each non-vampire creature, and you get to create a blood token. There's that black-red blood deck that we'll be talking about later. But this one can be a one-sided wrath, especially if your opponent's in blue-white with a lot of smaller disturbed creatures. Of course, if your opponent's playing vampires, it's probably pretty crappy in your deck, but hey, what are you going to do? I think the upside on this is quite high, and then the downside is, of course, very low. High variance card, but definitely one I want to keep an eye out for, and one I would watch out for if my opponent was in a Vampires deck. Lastly, we'll bring up the removal again here. 3 mana instant speed, deal 5 is pretty strong, and then if it targets a spirit, it deals 2 damage to the permanent's controller, which is relevant damage, right? If you're an aggro deck. But 3 mana, deal 5 at instant speed is quite strong, especially with all those disturb enchantments running around to try to scratch back your value and prevent your opponent from enchanting up their other spirits. All right, top commons. First one is a reprint, a Braid. 2 mana, instant speed, deal 3. There's also that value there. Sometimes, maybe 5% of the time, you'll destroy an artifact with it. There's a few strong artifacts in the set. So, but yeah, just a easy removal, a Braid. Just one of the all-timer good incinerate effects. Next up, I have Flame Blessed Bolts. 1 mana, deal 2 to a creature or planeswalker, and then if that creature or planeswalker would die, exile it. So this is very good against the Spirits deck. But there's also, I think we talked about the number of 3 mana 3/2s running around. There's also quite a few of those in this set. So this is going to kill quite a few creatures. Very cheap, instant speed, and then there's a lot of upside in a set with disturbed creatures and a ton of recursion effects for the yard. Last up, I have Blood Petal Celebrant. It's 2 mana, 2/1. When it attacks, it has first strike, and then when it dies, you get a blood token. I wasn't super impressed with a lot of the commons in red, and I wanted to pick something cheap because the red decks in this format, I think, are very aggressive. Even the green-red Werewolves deck is pretty aggressive here. The white-red, of course, is aggressive. Black-red is very aggressive. Green-red, I think, is a very aggressive beatdown deck. And then even blue-red has a lot of pinging effects in that one, where you ping your opponent. And so I think threatening their life total with this, which is a very annoying attacker, 2/1 first strike attacker is annoying. And then you also have value when eventually it dies off. You trade on defense with it or whatever. Your opponent gets too annoyed and kills it. You get some value, you get a blood token, which is going to fuel your vampire decks as well. So I like that one quite a bit. All right, last up we have green. So one thing to note in this set, there's a lot of really good fixing, and then there's also some ramp here too. So Cartographer's Survey is 4 mana. Look at the top 7, put 2 land cards from among them onto the battlefield, tapped. And that's going to ramp you to 6 or 7 mana by the next turn, right? And the odds of you not having 2 land in your top 7 are very, very small. So this should work 90% of the time or so, maybe even a little bit more than 90% of the time. And I think it's worth it to have a one of these if you need to ramp. So you're in the blue-green mill deck, or green-red werewolves. Even the green-black toughness deck has a lot of fatties in it. This card can really accelerate your mana, and then it also finds your fixing as well. Next up, I have a cool creature here. I don't know how good this one's going to be. I think it's going to be very good if you can bring it into play when it's nighttime out. But Infestation Expert, 5 mana for 3/4. When it ETBs or attacks, you make a 1/1 insect token. This also works if you're green-black or green-blue, and you have some exploit creatures in your deck. The tokens are great to exploit. And then on the backside, it becomes a 4/5, and then you make 2 insect tokens when it ETBs or attack. So I think that's just a nice little value creature that you're going to have to build around and think about, right? Like, do you have a battlefield pump or something like that that's going to make those tokens more relevant? Or a way to sack them, some way to use them. Last up, it wouldn't be limited if we didn't have a big green dope, and I think this one is awesome. So 7/6 reach trample for 7 mana, right? Something perfect to ramp to with your Cartographer's Survey. When it ETBs, you gain 5 life, so it catches you up. If it's in your yard, your opponent kills it, they spend the removal on it, you mill it. If you're green-blue, you can tap 3 mana and then gain 5 more life. So it gains you 10 life, takes a removal spell, an unconditional removal spell to bring down, And if your opponent can't bring it down with removal, it's just going to kill them, right? Real quick. You can't. It has reach, so you can't get past it. You can't fly over the top of it. So this card, I think, is really, really strong. So we'll have to see if this is a format where you can get to 7 mana. But with the amount of ramp in this format, I think you're going to be able to. All right, top commons. First one, this was tough for me. There's quite a few decent commons, I think. But they're all relatively flat in power level. First is Spore Crawler, 3/2 for 3 mana. When it dies, you draw a card. So it's just a very efficient creature that's going to trade up on defense, and then draw you a card. So it just replaces itself. Just what's not to love? So it's just a very simple, easy 3/2, very good defensive creature. There's 4/3s running around or whatever, and then you don't mind swinging with it. You don't care if your opponent trades. If it trades down for a 2/2, whatever. You still get to draw a card, right? Next up, Flourishing Hunter. This is another huge life gain creature. 6 mana, 6/6. It's a wolf, which is relevant types in this set, with the green-red archetype, which is wolves or werewolves. And then when it ETBs, you gain life equal to the greatest toughness among other creatures you control. And if you're playing green, you're by turn 6, you'll have something with at least 3 toughness. But if you're playing in the big butts toughness-based green-black deck, there's a 5-drop with 13 toughness. So casting this after you have that, I'm playing gaining 13 life. Kind of ridiculous, but awesome, and I want to be able to do it. I'm really excited for that green-black deck to see how it plays out. Although I don't think it's very strong. But we'll see. Last up, I have the Bite spell, Wolf Strike. 3 mana, instant speed, target creature you control gets +2/+0 if it's night. But if it's not night, it still just bites your opponent at instant speed, which is still really strong. And then it can also be used to pump, trade up, like in combat if it's nighttime. Even if it can be used on defense as well, like with your Spore Crawler or something. If it's nighttime, your opponent attacks in with like a 5/5. That's like the dream scenario, right? You Wolf Strike your Spore Crawler, it becomes a 5/2, trades with their 5/5, and then kills their other 5/5, right? Living the dream. But I think this card is, your standard bite spell that we see in just about every limited set these days. All right, up next, Colorless, and then we'll get into the archetypes. So first is we were talking about some of the ramp and fixing. A lot of it is colorless. So the first is a mana rock that has the ability to exile cards from a graveyard, which is very relevant in a set with Disturb and Graveyard Recursion. So I think if you need to splash or ramp in your deck, this is a pretty easy one of include. I wouldn't put this in just for the exile ability, but if you need a mana rock, this is a great one. Next up, more ramp. Foreboding Statue for a mana rock is a 1/2. At the beginning of your end step, if you have 3 or more omen counters on it, you get an omen counter whenever you tap it. You can untap it, then transform it, and then you get a 5/5, which is pretty good for a mana rock, I would say. So I think that card's kind of nice too. We'll see how it plays out. Last up, Fixing Evolving Wilds is back. This is, you'll notice the icon is from Midnight Hunt, but it's also in Crimson Vow as well, Evolving Wilds. All right, now we're into the archetypes. So Spirits and Auras are the blue-white deck. So Auras matter, so you have cards that care about enchantments. There's a lot of Disturb synergies here, and then you can get some value from self-mill cards that you'll find in blue. The Signpost is going to be Brine Comer. It's 3 mana for a 1/1. But when it ETBs or becomes the target of an aura spell, you make a 1/1 spirit creature token with flying, and then it disturbs for 2. And the backside is the same thing as that ability. Whenever a creature enchanted with a Brinebound Gift becomes the target of an aura spell, you make a 1/1 spirit creature token with flying. And then also when it ETBs, you also make one as well. So you get a lot of value for that card for the price. So I think it's pretty good. Next up, we have Distracting Geist. We'll see if this one's a little bit too expensive. It is a very fragile creature, but it's scary. It can win a game. 3 mana for a 2/1. When it attacks, you tap target creature defending player controls, and it disturbs for 5 mana, and I bet you can guess the ability. Yep. Enchanted creature, whenever it attacks, tap target creature defending player control. So you'll notice that with the disturbed creatures. The enchantment aura is just going to be their ability. All right, and then up next for signposts, one I like quite a bit is Mischievous Geist. So I think this is also good exploit fodder if you're in the blue-black deck. But 1/1 for 2 mana. When it attacks, or when it deals combat damage to a player, draw a card. So if you can give it flying, evasion somehow, it's going to get you a ton of value. Your opponent has to deal with it. And then on the backside, it becomes Curiosity. So for 2 mana, enchanted creature, whenever it deals combat damage to a player, draw a card. So you put that on your evasive creature, you wait till you draw out your opponent's removal, and then you cast it. So there's lots of different synergies and ways that you can enable this one. The synergy pieces for blue-white. So Heron Blessed Geist, 5 mana, 3/3 flyer, not great, but it also has the graveyard ability for 4 mana, create 2 1/1 white spirit creature tokens if you control an enchantment. So that gives you your value right there, but you have to have an enchantment. Up next, Dawnheart Geist. Depending, I'm not sure on this one, but depending on how many enchantments you have, and if all of your creatures are enchantments, you should have quite a few. Maybe you have 10 enchantments in a deck. There's also a pacifism effect in this set. There's an O-ring type effect in this set. So there's a lot of different enchantments that aren't just the disturbed creatures, but each time you cast one, you gain 2 life. And so that has the potential to get you a ton of life. And the blue-white disturbed deck looks to be kind of a grindy, value-based deck. So extending the game, gaining yourself some life can be very, very relevant. There's also the white-black life gain deck, and so there are some cards in white that care about life gain. Up next, we have Geistlight Snare. I put this one in because it should go in the deck. I still don't think you should play it. Maybe if you're doing the thing and you're going to be able to cast this for 1 mana, it's worth it, but mana leak usually isn't that great in limited. Because games tend to go longer, you don't spend your mana every turn, and when you're in top deck mode, this card's pretty bad. But if you can cast it for 1 mana, it's fine. You can put it in your deck. I just wouldn't put this in any deck outside of blue-white, and even then, I would probably look for ways to cut it. All right. Up next, the life gain deck, white-black. So this one looks really cool. And the signpost uncommon, I think, is very good. So a 3 mana 2/3 lifelink is already just fine, right? At the beginning of your end step, if you gained life this turn, you may pay 2 if you do draw a card. So then you're going to gain a ton of value. There's tons of passive ways just to gain life in this deck, so you don't need to be attacking with a lifelinker to gain life. There's just tons of ways to do it. Like Panicked Bystander, 2 mana for a 2/2. Whenever Panic Bystander or another creature you control dies, gain a life at the beginning of your end step. If you gain 3 or more life this turn, transform it. It becomes a 3/3 that can gain Death Touch for 2 mana. A 3/5 Death Touch is really strong, right? Obviously very strong on defense. But unless your opponent has 1 creature with 5 power, you can give this thing Death Touch, and then it's going to be a 2-for-1 for your opponent to deal with it. And then you still get its static ability, right? Whenever Cackling Culprit or another creature you control dies, you gain 1 life, trigger your Markov Purifier, whatever, right? Next up is another signpost, Restless Bloodseeker. I like this one quite a bit as well. It has cross synergies with blood tokens, which is something I've noticed in Crimson Vow. There's lots of cards that fit in multiple archetypes. Restless Bloodseeker is one of them. 2 mana at the beginning of your end step. If you gained life this turn, create a blood token, and then it's a 1/3 body. And if you sacrifice 2 blood tokens, you get to transform it, and it becomes a 3/3. With an activated ability for 5 mana, each opponent loses 2 life, and you gain 2 life. So that'll end a game pretty quick as well in the late game if this thing survives. So I like that one quite a bit. Just being able to generate a ton of blood tokens seems good to me. What am I going to do with those blood tokens, right? So Gluttonous Guest, when it ETBs, it banks 1, and then whenever you sacrifice 1, you gain a life. And it also has a big butt. It's a 1/4 for 3 mana. So this can go in the toughness deck too. It obviously goes in the red-black vampire deck, and it fits really well in the black-white life gain deck. So it goes in all these different archetypes. Just a strong synergy piece for this deck. This is, I almost put this in my top 3 commons for white. Traveling Minister is so strong in just about every white deck. It's a human, which is relevant for white-green. It's obviously gains you life every single turn, which is relevant for white-black. It buffs your creatures and makes combat harder. So if you're in, you have evasive creatures in white-blue, it helps your flyers to get through. If you're in white-red, which is aggro, it's going to help those creatures get in as well. So, like this card quite a bit, and it's 1 mana, so your opportunity cost is very low. So, very strong synergy piece. And then lastly, Courier Bat. I know we talked about this one, but it's one of the strongest payoffs. If you're in white-black, it's just a super cheap, efficient Gravedigger effect if you're able to gain life. All right, up next, attack. So white-red focuses on creatures that gain benefits when they attack. There's a minor theme if you attack with 2. And then there's also a bunch of training cards in here that's focused mostly in white. There's also some of that in white-green. White-green's more the humans deck, though. Humans tribal. All right, so training and attacking. So here we go. 4 mana for a 1/3 flying haste at the beginning of combat of your turn. 2 target creatures you control each get +1/+0 until end of turn. So this becomes a 2/3 flying haste for 4, which is fine, but it also enables attacks, enables training creatures. So it does a lot of minor things here as well. Griffwing Cavalry. This card's amazing. It has relevant types, so this is very good in white-green because it's human, but also because it's flying. It has training, and then whenever it attacks, you can jump one of your creatures for 2 mana. It is kind of small. The stats the rate isn't good, so it's obviously bad on defense, but if you're white-red, you're going to be attacking anyway. You want to be the aggressor, so card is very strong. Up next, Alluring Suitor. This is that attack with 2 thing I was talking about. 3 mana for a 2/3 is not great, but when you do attack with exactly 2 creatures, transforms into a 3/3, and then it's a 3/3 trample. You get 2 red for its activated ability right away, and that's where Deadly Dancer and another target creature each get +1/+0 until end of turn. So it pumps itself. Attacks as a 4/3 the turn that you transform it. So that's going to hit all your training stuff as well, and then potentially ramp you. If you don't need the pump that turn, it's just going to ramp you. So that's also good. All right, Synergy. Estwald Shield Basher. This thing can attack, all right? You just got to pay 1 and it becomes indestructible. So your opponent just can't block it. They'll have to figure out a different way to deal with it, because 4 power is no joke. And it's going to, you just can't block that. I mean, you're just going to end up chumping that real quick. You can't take 4 damage every turn. It is 4 mana, but if they are able to interact, it only has 2 toughness, so it can die, and it only gets that indestructible thing when it attacks. So things to note: not a good defensive card, but very, very strong on attacks. Fleeting Spirit, 2 mana for a 3/1, so this is going to be really, really good with your training stuff. Tap white mana, exile 3 cards from your yard. It gains first strike, and then you can also discard and to exile it and then return it to your control. So if your opponent tries to use removal on it, you can discard a card to keep it alive, and eventually they're just going to have to start eating 3 damage or whatever, because it's very difficult to block 3/1 first strike. Very annoying attacker, especially for 2 mana. Last up, this is going to be kind of one of those bread and butter cards that really only white-red's gonna want. So Daybreak Combinance, 3 mana for a 2/2 haste, and then when it ETBs, target creature gets +2/+0 until end of turn. So it makes itself a 4/2 on attacks. It enables those triggers to attack with exactly 2 creatures. Just a fine card, and I think your white-red deck's the only one that's gonna want it. It also has relevant types, human. All right. White-green, this is the human deck, so human synergy. You get training payoffs here, and then you get counter payoffs as well. And the signpost for that is Sigardian Paladin, 4 mana, 4/4. Great rate. And then as long as you put a counter on a creature this turn, it gets trample and lifelink, which is massive. And then you can pay 3 mana to give any creature with a counter on it trample and lifelink until end of turn. So you cannot race this card. You absolutely cannot if you're doing the thing. I also have Allenbach Escort. I don't know how good this one is going to be. We'll have to see how the format shakes out. It's a 1/1 vigilance for 1. Sack it to make a creature you control a lifelink and indestructible until end of turn, as long as that creature has a +1/+1 counter on it. But if you're in the white-green deck, your creature should, and those creatures, of course, with the counters on them, become very attractive targets for removal, and this is going to save them. So, good stuff. Cloak Cadet is your main card advantage engine here. Its rate is not good. 5 mana for a 2/4, but it does have training. So when it swings in, it'll be a 3/5, right? And then whenever a counter is put on a human you control, draw a card, it triggers only once each turn. But very, very strong. If you can swing at this once and get your card back, you're doing the thing. And it also has relevant types there. Human. Synergy pieces. Laid to Rest. We'll see how clunky this one is. I'm not sure. This might be too slow for the format, but we'll see. Whenever a human you control dies, draw a card, and whenever a creature you control with a counter on it dies, you gain 2 life. So perhaps this can help extend the game, and then you just accrue value over time. My thoughts are that white-green is too aggressive to really make a lot of it too much advantage on this, but there could be certain builds that would like this card. We'll have to see how the format shakes out to know if this card's good, though. Up next, Griff Rider. Just a super solid human with training, evasion for 3 mana. We talked about this one before, one of the better commons in white, I feel. So I think this one is quite strong and a staple that you're just going to play as many as you got in your white-green decks. Lastly, Dawnheart Disciple. I'm really excited for this card. I think this card is very aggressive, very good. 2 mana, 2/2, and whenever a human ETBs under your control, it gets +1/+1. So it becomes a 3/3 for 2 mana. It enables training when you can cast other humans. So it becomes out of hand and a very annoying attacker for your opponents to deal with. All right, now we are on one of my favorite decks, zombies and exploiting. So there's zombie synergies, there's recursion here, and then you're going to want to look for enter the battlefield and on death triggers to get more value from your exploit creatures. The signpost is going to be Skull Scab. 2 mana for a 2/2 zombie with exploit. And then whenever a creature you control exploits a non-token creature, you make a zombie token. Pretty simple, pretty straightforward, but if you're in the deck and you have exploit, very good. This card, I think, is going to be a beating. 5 mana for a 3/5. Exploit, and when it does, target creature's owner puts it on top or bottom of their library. So you just get rid of their best creature, and then you sacrifice one of your on-death things, and so you get value from that. Maybe you make another zombie. Just a huge beating. And this thing is a 3/5, so it can tangle pretty well in combat. Lastly, I have Fell Stinger. This is another cheaper exploit creature, which again you want to watch out for, but it's a 3/2 Death Touch for 3 mana, so it's very good on defense. And then when it exploits, target player draws 2 cards and loses 2 life. So very good if you have fodder to sacrifice. You just draw 2 cards. That's fantastic. For the rate, for 3 mana, sign me up. Some synergy pieces. So we're looking at sack fodder. So Biolume Egg, 3 mana for an 0/4 defender. Not great. When it ETBs, you scry 2. And when you sacrifice it, return it to the battlefield transformed under its owner's control at the beginning of the next end step. And when it transforms, it becomes a 4/4. And if you sack 2 islands, it can't be blocked. So that's a good finisher. So very good sack fodder that turns into a threat. So I think in this deck alone, this card becomes very good. So you're going to be the only person that really wants the Biolume Egg. So you should be able to get these. And I think it's obviously a very, very good sacrifice fodder. Up next, Wretched Throng. 2 mana for a 2/1. When it dies, you may search your library for a card named Wretched Throng, reveal it, put it into your hand. So it just keeps recurring, right? So if you have 3 of these in your deck, you sack one, you go find another one, you play that, you sack that, you find the last one. Usually, it's not going to be great if you have 2 or less. If it's 1, if you only have 1 of these, obviously it's unplayable. If you have 2, it's okay, but really you want 3 or 4 of these in your exploit decks. Up next, I have Doomed Dissenter. 2 mana for a 1/1. When it dies, you make a 2/2 black zombie creature token. Again, great sacrifice exploit value. A very strong card. You'll take as many of these as you can get in your blue-black decks. There's also a 1 mana 1/1 skeleton that you can turn from your yard to the battlefield tapped for 3 mana. That's also fantastic sack fodder. You just don't get any extra value from that creature, but still really, really good in the exploit deck. But Doom Dissenter, I think, is premium for sack fodder. All right, next up, spells. So in Strixhaven, we had Magecraft, which was instants and sorceries only, and then we also had that in Midnight Hunt as well, instants and sorceries. Now is non-creatures. So enchantments count. That means that your blue disturb creatures can go in this deck really, really well. The Signpost, Wandering Mind, 3 mana for a 2/1 flyer. When it ETBs, you go to the top 6 and choose a non-creature, non-land, put it into your hand. Just an amazing rate. You're going to have a ton of spells. It's going to find you the best one in the top 6 of your library. And it's a 2/1 flyer for 3 mana, which isn't bad anyway. So just a fantastic Signpost. Uncommon there. Whispering Wizard. My gut tells me this card is too slow. 4 mana for a 3/2 is not a good rate. 2 toughness isn't good. It dies to everything. But when you cast a non-creature spell, you make a 1/1 white spirit creature token with flying. It can only trigger once each turn, but that's fine because you can cast a sorcery on your turn and an instant on your opponent's turn. Do that. I'm not as worried about the double spelling part of it. I'm more worried about 4 mana for a 3/2 and how easy it dies. We'll have to see how the format shakes out. And there's certainly going to be games where you don't have removal and you just lose to this card straight up, but we'll have to see. Up next, I have Holt Raconteur, another creature that doesn't have good rate here. 4 mana for a 2/4 is not good. And whenever you cast a non-creature spell, it pings your opponent. And that's the day-bound side. The night-bound side is where things get interesting. Because it becomes a 4/4, which is a threat. And when you cast a spell, it pings your opponent for 2. Which will end a game very, very quickly, especially if you're double spelling or something, right? Blue-red tends to have a lot of ways to draw cards, to double spell, and this thing becomes a real big problem, right? Up next, we have Cruel Witness. 4 mana for a 3/3 flyer, which is fine. And whenever you cast a non-creature spell, you can look at the top card of your library and essentially surveil. You can put that card in your yard. If it's land and you don't need land, you put it in the yard. If it's a disturbed creature, can put it into the yard, get your value from it, whatever, but it's just a fine card. If you're in the deck, I'd pick this pretty highly. Up next, Repository Scab, I think, has a home here. It's an exploit creature, 4 mana for a 3/3. When you exploit a creature, you can return an instant or sorcery from your yard to your hand, which I think is good. I think that's going to be good in this deck when you have a ton of card draw, removal, non-creatures that you want to cast. A bunch of cheap spells and stuff. I think this card's going to be just fine. And lastly is the other pinger. I think this pinger is actually better than the uncommon one, the werewolf one. 2 mana for a 1/3. And then when you cast a non-creature spell, you ping. So it's super cheap. You can get these in multiples. If you get 2 or 3 of these on the battlefield, they're just going to kill your opponent. So it's fantastic. But yeah, that's Spells Matter. And up next, we have the blue-green Self-Mill. Now, this one it's a little bit different than Self-Mill from Midnight Hunt, that this one wants to mill creature cards in particular. So you're going to want all creatures in this deck if you can. 20 creatures or so. So the Signpost Vilespawn Spider is really, really strong. It's a 2 mana 2/3 reach, which is already good. At the beginning of your upkeep, mill a card, and then for 4 mana, sack it. You make a 1/1 green insect token for each creature card in your yard. If you have 10 creatures in your yard, you're just going to kill the opponent with this thing. This is a 1-card combo that mills you to put creatures in your yard, and then eventually it kills your opponent. So fantastic signpost uncommon. Soul Cipher Board. I think this card is going to be a trap, but if it has a use, it will only be in this deck, so you might be able to get this super late. I wouldn't pick this highly ever. But there are some decks I can see that might want this. So it's 2 mana for an artifact. It ETBs with 3 omen counters on it. And then whenever a creature card is put into your yard from anywhere, you remove a omen counter. You can also activate the artifact 2 mana. Look at the top 2 cards in your library. Put one of them into your yard so you can get creatures into the yard that way, or when you're milling them normally. And then when you transform it, you get a 3/2 flyer that has a repeatable ability for 4 mana, draw 2 cards and discard a card. So we'll have to see how this one shakes out. One of the big problems, I think, with this is that even if you draw this late, you might not have time to mill 3 creature cards. So you really need to have this on turn 2. And then on turn 2, you're probably going to want to play a creature. So my gut is telling you that this signpost is a trap, but we'll have to see. There's certainly going to be some decks that can use this. And you'll probably die to it at some point, right? A 3/2 flyer is a threat. Up next, Reclusive Taxidermist. 2 mana for a 1/2, tap it. Add a mana of any color in your mana pool. So great ramp, great fixing already. But if there's 4 or more creature cards in your yard, it becomes a threat. It becomes a werebear. It becomes a 4/4. And your opponent has to deal with it. And it still is going to have that ability to tap for mana. So I think this card is really, really strong. Would be happy to first pick this. We'll see how splashing works in this set, but the ability to splash is certainly there in the set. Synergy pieces. Skywarp Scab. So I think normally it's pretty tough to get 2 creature cards in your yard in a lot of cases, right? You turtle up or you know, whatever, they end up on the board. It's you know, not the most trivial thing. Like by what turn do you have 2 creature cards in your yard? Usually not by turn 5, you don't. And this is a 5 mana 2/5 flyer, good body. And if you do exile those 2 creature cards from your yard, you get to draw a card, at which point this card becomes actively good. And I think in green-blue, you should be able to mill yourself by turn 5, get your value from this, and then you have a big butt flyer, right? That's going to ping in for damage and be super annoying for your opponent. All right. Up next, Selhoff Entomber. I really want this card to work. I don't know if it's gonna, but I really want it to. It's 2 mana for a 1/3. Discard a creature card, draw a card. So we'll see. We'll see what happens. Usually with a looter effect, you don't want to discard creatures. You want to discard your lands late game. But we'll see. If this card is going to work in any deck, it's going to be in the self-mill card deck that cares about creatures in the yard. And then Mulch. Mulch is just a fantastic way not only to hit your land drops, hit your splashes, but also to fill up your graveyard with stuff. 2 mana, reveal the top 4, put all land cards revealed this way into your hand and the rest into your yard. And then there's also those like random times where you cast this and you flip up like 3 lands and you're like, oh crap, okay, that was pretty dope, right? 2 mana, draw 3, I'll take it. So Mulch is a good card, and I think this deck is the only one that wants it in the blue-green deck. All right, up next we have Blood, right? The most grimdark, edgy of all the decks. A vampire aggro, and then there's a lot of blood token synergies. And the signpost is going to be 2 mana for a 3/2, already a great rate. When it ETBs, create a blood token. Okay, I'm in. Sacrifice it. Target creature gets -X until end of turn, where X is twice the number of blood tokens you control. So if you have 3 blood tokens out, it's going to get -6 and take down anything. And this deck is capable of generating a ton of blood tokens. Also to note, you don't have to sacrifice the blood tokens for that effect. It's just how many do you have on the battlefield, right? So this card is good early, it's good late, just a fantastic signpost. Very aggressive as well. Good stats. Up next, Wedding Security. Looks like Adam Driver in that picture. 5 mana for a 4/4. Whenever it attacks, you can sack a blood token. If you do, it becomes bigger. It gets a counter, and you get to draw a card. So super fantastic for the rate. Remember, I think in AFR we had Owlbear, which was a 4/4 trample for 5 ETB draw card. This can be bigger than that as long as you get to swing with it. So this is a good top end maybe for the Vampire aggro deck. We'll have to see how clunky this card ends up being in the format. Up next, we have Blood Hypnotist. I think this one's going to be really important. It can't block it, but if you're aggro, you're not really going to care about that, right? It's 3 mana for 3/3. Whenever you sack a blood token, target creature can't block this turn. It only triggers once. So if to note, there's no way to sack a blood token with this. It just cares about them being sacked by other things. You can always pay the mana to sack the blood token. And do it that way. But if you have like wedding security or whatever on the field, that can consume a blood token. That counts as well. And then you start shutting off blockers for your opponent to get in those last few points of damage. All right, synergy pieces. Tons of ways in this set to create blood tokens. Falconwrath Celebrants is a good finisher, I think as a 1-of maybe in the Vampire aggro deck. It's expensive at 5 mana, but it's a 4/4 menace, which is super relevant. Menace is tough to deal with. And then, especially against an aggro deck where you're going to, have a ton of creatures attacking, your opponent's going to be at low life, they're going to have to make some bad decisions, right? When it ETBs, you also create 2 blood tokens, which is quite a few. Next, we have Blood Crazed Socialite. I like this one a lot, actually. So it's a 3/3 menace for 4. When it ETBs, you create 1 blood token. When it attacks, you can sack 1. And then if you do, it gets +2/+2 and becomes a 5/5 menace on attack. So that's really, really good, I think. And then last up, I have Belligerent Guest. This will be kind of a staple card, I think, in the Vampire deck. 3 mana, so it's on the cheaper side for a 3/2 trample. And then whenever it deals damage to a player, create a blood token. So you don't mind trading this with a 2/2 because you get your token out of it anyway, which you're going to be able to use in a ton of different ways, right? So I think that one's also quite strong. All right, this is the big butts deck. Toughness matters. Haven't really seen this too much, so I'm excited to see how it plays out. I just don't think it's very well supported, but we'll see. We'll see. If you have this signpost in play, it becomes very well supported. But it's 4 mana, Ancient Lumbernaught, 1/4. Each creature you control with toughness greater than its power assigns combat damage equal to its toughness rather than power. So when Ancient Lumbernaught blocks or attacks, it deals 4 damage to a creature and an opponent, right? That's how you got to think about it. Catapult Fodder, I think, is the other staple card that's going to make this deck work. Okay, this card is insane. This is probably my favorite card in the set. 3 mana for a 1/5. At the beginning of combat, on your turn, if you control 3 or more creatures that have toughness greater than their power and it counts itself, you transform it into the 2/6. And then 3 mana, tap it, sack another creature. Target opponent loses life equal to the sacrificed creature's toughness. Now, there's a card we'll be talking about that's just going to one-shot your opponent, pretty much. Up next, we also have Dormant Grove. I think this is another one of those clunky enchantments. I hope there's a place for it in the set. I don't know if there will be. 4 mana for this. Put a +1/+1 counter on a creature you control at the beginning of combat. Then if a creature you control has toughness 6 or greater, you transform it into a 3/6 Vigilance, which is a good rate for a 4 mana card. Other creatures you control have Vigilance. So one thing to note, if you already have a Catapult Captain in play, you can just cast this and get your 3/6 Vigilance for 4. And then it gives all your other creatures Vigilance as well, which is strong. So I think it's good in this deck, actually. Up next, we talked about Flourishing Hunter, but this is the deck that it's meant for, right? You got big butts everywhere. You're going to gain a ton of life and win any races with your opponent. And then this is the one that you want to sacrifice. It's a 1/13 for 5 mana ETBs tap. Now, this card is stone unplayable in every other deck. In every single other deck. Super unplayable. But in this deck, if you have the cards to support it, it can just end the game. If you have Lumbernaught, where this is dealing damage according to its toughness, it attacks as a 13/13. Okay. It's ridiculous. If you have Catapult Captain, you can sack it and nug your opponent for 13 damage. Ridiculous stuff. Lastly, you're going to need some sort of cheap creatures with this deck. There is great fixing in ramp and green, but you're still going to need to do it. And a 2/4 for 2 mana is really, really good. Of course, it's only on your turn, which isn't great, but if you do have Lumberknot, this attacks as a 4/4. You can sack this to deal 4 damage during your turn if you have a Catapult, whatever. So there's different things you can do with it. And for 2 mana, opportunity cost is very low. So I think this card fits fine in the green-black deck. And then last up, we have our Were, in quotes, Wolves. I cleaved the Were out, as you can see. It's Werewolf and Wolf Tribal. And this is just your straight-up beatdown deck. So, Child of the Pack, another big butt creature, 4 mana for a 2/5. Tap 4, make a 2/2 wolf creature token. So, a fantastic mana sink, right? So if you're manipulating Daybound, Nightbound, you have something really, really good to sink your mana into and not cast a spell, make it night. On the backside, it's actually, I don't even know if the backside is better than the front. It's a 5/5 trample. Other creatures you control get +1/+0. If you have a big board, of course, this is better, but usually I just want to keep making my little wolves, right? And then we have Ruinbound Wolf, which is only going to be useful in that Werewolf Tribal. It's 2 mana for a 2/2. So opportunity cost very low. Tap 4 and the Wolf deals damage to the number of wolves and werewolves you control to target opponent. So if you have a big board of wolves out, it's going to clock your opponent pretty quick. So it's a very good late game threat. And then Packsong Pup. You need what we learned in Midnight Hunt is that werewolves only function if you have 2-drop wolves to play. So it's good that these signposted commons are 2-drops. With Packsong Pup, this thing's going to grow out of control. At the beginning of combat, if you control another wolf or werewolf, it starts getting counters on it. And then when it dies, you gain life equal to its power. So this card fits in a lot of different decks too, right? It fits in that white-green counters deck. White-black is the life gain deck. So when it dies, if you're in black-green, maybe you have some life gain synergy stuff, or green-white, you have some life gain synergy stuff. So there's different decks that this can fit in, and all you need is one more wolf or werewolf in play for it to start getting counters and becoming a threat that your opponent's eventually going to have to deal with. But, of course, not great drawing it late. You're going to want this on turn 2. All right, synergy pieces. Wolfkin Outcast. If you control a wolf or werewolf, this becomes playable. If you don't have it, it's not really playable. But if you do, it's only 4 mana to cast for a 5/4, which is a great rate. And on the backside, it becomes a 6/5 during Nightbound, but whenever it or another wolf or werewolf dies, you get to draw a card, and that can trigger as many times as you want. So that's incredible value if it's nighttime for this deck. Then we have another great 2-drop here, Hungry Ridge Wolf, 2 mana for a 2/2, and then it gets +1/+0 in trample if you're doing the tribal thing. Last up, I have another great fixer here and ramper at common as well. 2/3 for 3 mana. Tap it, add 1 mana of any color, and on the backside it becomes a 3/4 that ramps you even further during nighttime. Adds 2 mana of any one color. So another very strong ramp card in green. Lastly, so we talked about splashing potential in this set. We have Evolving Wilds, all this fixing that's colorless for artifacts with mana rocks, and then there's also the ramp and fixing in green. So I think there's a potential to see if splashing works. Now, in Modern Limited, splashing hasn't been great because cards are so powerful. You're able to get 23 really good playables in most decks. But if any set is going to have splashing be viable, I think this one could. Because of the amount of fixing and ramp. So there's synergy clusters here that I wanted to put together. So in the Naya colors, green, white, red, you have like a humans, aggro, attacking, training type synergy that can be blended across these colors, right? That fit really well together. in the Bant colors, so green, blue, white. You have this disturb / creature mill thing going on, right? Where while the disturbed creature is in your yard, it counts as a creature, but you can still cast it out of your yard as an enchantment, which is pretty cool. So they do count as creatures when they're in your yard, and then you can still get the value from them on both sides of the equation. In the Mardu colors, I have like a life gain blood synergy that we kind of talked about, like with Gluttonous Guest, which makes a blood token when it ETBs, and whenever you sacrifice a blood token, you gain life. And then, of course, White-Black cares about life gain, so you can kind of combine these colors to get something going there, or splash for synergy purposes. Up next, I have the Sultai Exploit Mill Recur plan. Black has a ton of recursive things. Blue-green's really good at milling itself. Blue and black have exploit. So there's lots of ways that these can cross over. And then lastly, I have the Grixis non-creature spell disturb deck. Also, you have exploiting to get cards in the yard, your disturbed creatures in blue, right? So you can exploit those, get the thing in the yard, cast it for its disturb cost, get the non-creature spell from it, and then you also have some synergies there as well. The Grixis side of it, I think is the least synergistic of these clusters, but I still think there's something that you can work with there. So that's going to be my review for the set. I think this looks super exciting to play. I can't wait to do it. We'll see how it all plays out in a week when it launches. All right. That's it for me.